this subject. What I would like to do, in light of my own research, is to make sort of a general call in conferences of this nature, which I've been to in the past, and rarely had this opportunity to sort of showcase and showboat. I would like to say that I think it'd be a great service to sort of bear in mind the long-term perspective to some of these issues, which I tried to allude to in one of the earlier sessions. Not so much because the long-term perspective necessarily has such a tremendous bearing on what's going on at the present, but simply because it helps to put into perspective, I think, the multiplicity of different variables that affect what we're talking about, and also to bear in mind that as one of those variables changes, so do the others. So that when we begin to make statements about sort of there's much more information available now, we should also bear in mind that it's much easier to search that information, for example. Although the audience is larger, perhaps that audience is more fragmented, although perhaps the number of companies have increased in certain areas. There's also a certain degree of concentration, and again, the stakeholders and shareholders to those corporations are different. And the consequence, I think, of keeping this whole sort of variety of different factors in mind makes the issues much more complex and perhaps prevents us or makes us aware of the fact that statements intended to say that this is the first, this is the last, this is the everything, are perhaps not as relevant and as insightful as they are. That said, to my far left is Swisher, who's a technology columnist for the Wall Street Journal. She runs All Things Digital, allthingsd.com with Walt Mossberg. She's a columnist for the Journal. Yes? No. No. In partnership with her fellow journal columnists.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right. Sorry. Don't follow this, which I do. And there, I'll stop there. Simon Hampton, on this side, joined Google as Director for European Public Policy and Government Relations in April 2008, prior to which he had several years of experience across media value chain working for Time Warner, AOL, and Belgacom, and he spent several years doing other things, including in government, working for the European Commission and for the UK Foreign Office. Mark Rogers, who's the co-founder of online monitoring and response specialist Market Sentinel, which monitors consumer-generated content in blogs and message boards. And as a whole host of rather impressive customers, including Yahoo Europe, Land Rover Jaguar Cars, the BBC Trust, Honda, Avis, Bacardi, Cadbury, and so on. Experian as well. So I'm going to leave the sort of comments about blogs to them, and they'll each have about 10 minutes, and then we'll have questions. So why don't we start with Karen?
Okay. All right, I'll just, this is going to be our corporate blogs, but about all kinds of communications for corporations. So I want to talk about a couple things really quickly. I was on the media panel before, and it had the same themes, the idea of change and how horrible it is. The only thing I can say is there used to be a group in San Francisco and all over the United States. It was an AIDS activist group called ACT UP, and their motto was, "We're here, we're queer, get used to it." The motto right now should be, "We're here, we're social, get used to it." What's happening right now throughout the internet and throughout interactive social media technologies is here to stay. I always say the kids love it, and everyone in this room, for all intents and purposes, is dead, and it doesn't matter what you think. Because what matters, what people think, is my 4-year-old or my 7-year-old, and in fact they're even too old in that format, is that young people and people who will be matter to this media have embraced this, use it regularly, think it's terrific, and they're voting with their feet and their time and usage. Television usage has gone down, radio usage has gone down. We don't even have to talk about what's happening in the newspapers. It's a free fall headed for disaster. And meanwhile, sites like Facebook has just passed 300 million users around the globe, and this is a global phenomenon, not just a US phenomenon. Incredibly, finally, Facebook has actually also reached profitability. That may mean they just made $1, but the fact of the matter is now they're actually profitable, and they're headed towards probably greater profitability the larger they get. And so if you're a corporation, if you're an individual, if you're a media company, anyone else, you absolutely need to embrace and extend into this area not see it as a complement. I've heard the word complementary and adjunct and additive. It is the game. It is period the game now, and it's the way it is, and you need to move to it immediately and be part of it and understand all the tools. Even if there's some of them are just trying to, even if some of them are passing, you need to embrace and use all these tools. Secondly, devices are going to become really, really important as you move forward, especially mobile devices. It's something that has not been talked about a whole lot here, but mobile is the future of all this stuff. And by mobile, I don't mean just mobile phones, although they're critically important. But most people in the world do not access the internet on a computer. They access it on a mobile device in much of the world. These devices are now becoming smart. They're called smartphones. It's the Apple iPhone is a really important trend. Everyone might not have an Apple iPhone, but they will have some sort of smartphone that's highly interactive. An Apple iPhone right now is as powerful as the first computer and I'm 150 years old, but it's as powerful as the first computer I ever used. And its abilities will only increase. Apple's developing a tablet, a secret tablet that everybody knows about in Silicon Valley, that will extend this even more. The Kindle, the Sony e-reader, all these things are going to become really prevalent. Secondly, in that devices area, every single thing is going to become a screen as we move forward. The way we look at screens now is going to change rather dramatically. There's a lot of flexible screen technology going on, screens that appear everywhere and that interact with these smartphones, such as when you put down, this is not a smartphone, but when you put it down, it will incredibly, the things I've seen in some of the labs, they actually charge the phone on tables and other things, although they're having some issues with electrocuting children, so they can't do that. So once they surpass that tiny issue, it will start, you can start to, the idea of flicking, which the iPhone has pioneered, you flick things back and forth and everything becomes a screen. It changes the whole paradigm of computing as you move forward. Lastly, these things, not just on cell phones, but this is a flip. This is a flip which was bought by Cisco for $600 million just recently. It was a startup that only had about $30 million in investment, and it was sold for quite a bit of money. This is a tiny little video camera. You stick it in your computer. These kind of things and cameras and videos on phones and all sorts of things are going to be just about everywhere. They already are just about everywhere. Actually, your federal government, at least in our country, is taping every single person in the world with these kind of things, and we're so excited about that. Good thing they're so stupid that they won't figure out what to do with all that delicious information. So, and lastly, the most important thing you have to think about is transparency. Even though everybody makes a joke about Twitter and they use tweeting and twatting and all kinds of jokes about it, and it lends itself to treating it like it's a bunch of juveniles, the fact of the matter is it's another powerful, incredibly powerful medium. It's not clear whether it's going to make money yet, but I think it is, and clear the impact is yet, but it clearly is being used and is useful by a lot of people. Transparency is critically important, especially for companies as you move forward, because these things can have a certain amount of power. Right now on Twitter, I happen to have 300,000 followers, which is a lot. I'm like the Ashton Kutcher of tech. You can do lots of fun things to annoy companies, which I like to do on a regular basis. One of the things I just recently did is I was in Seattle, and there was some issues with my Hertz rent-a-car. A dome light wouldn't go off, and I was stuck in a car in the middle of the night in a part of Seattle I didn't want to particularly be in, and I didn't want to leave the car, so I had to go meet Steve Ballmer at Microsoft that next morning. I didn't want the car to be dead, and so I was sitting there in my car trying to get them to come, and I started tweeting because they wouldn't answer the phone. And I kept saying, these idiots at Hertz, why don't they answer the phone? I'm calling their emergency line. I guess an emergency means 23 hours later. All kinds of things that I started twittering. And the response was enormous. Like, everyone started twittering about how much they hated Hertz, which was terrific. And it is a very hateable rental car company. And I was contacted immediately by Hertz people that wanted to help me suddenly. It took them 7 hours, but that's all right. When I got to the airport, there was like an ambassadorship of Hertz there waiting for me, and all kinds of things. And now they're frightened every time I go. They're always there petting me when I get to Hertz. Now that's just me, but the fact of the matter is these things, people can really start to really respond on these things, and you have to be thinking about that as you form your corporate policies going forward. And lastly, the most important thing is don't discount, I guess I said, any of these internet technologies, because the things that they're developing in Silicon Valley and elsewhere around the globe, but mostly right now in Silicon Valley, are really incredibly powerful and can be empowering if they get out to the masses. And I do believe they will get out to more people than before, because it allows, vast amounts of people to interact, to publish, to do all kinds of things. And we can't be focusing on what people publish, but the ability to do so, and not get caught up in all the smallness of the worries. But the fact of the matter is, this creates a global publishing platform for much of humanity.
It's a broad topic, and I suppose the best way of thinking about the relationship between businesses and the web is to really think of businesses in a couple of ways. We all have our own sort of individual Twitter accounts, I guess, those of us who Twitter, and some of us, I think there was kind of an interesting time this morning where somebody said, well, I don't have a personal Twitter account, but we have a corporate Twitter account. And one of the things I think that a lot of companies are struggling with is okay, so if you've got a corporate Twitter account, what do you say? How do you start a conversation? How do you intervene in a conversation? What voice do you use? And that's really what happened to the whole debate about corporate blogs. And I think it's an unresolvable dilemma for big companies in this world. Maybe not totally unresolvable, but unresolved as yet. One of our clients, so we're a company that essentially looks at conversations online and tries to understand them using maths. And you can do that in a couple of ways. You can look at patterns of conversations and try and understand them using social network analysis, kind of interesting branch of maths, not to be confused with social networking, but it's essentially network analysis applied to social networks. And a lot of good people at the University of Oxford do a lot of interesting stuff in that area. You can also just look at keywords, as look at the things that people are actually saying and try and track those conversations as they go along. But always it comes down, when we deliver these reports and through desktop interfaces or conference calls and so on, there's always the question of, well, what do we do next? What do we do in relation to all of this? And that's not just the corporations putting that question to us, that's also the agencies that the people work for. And there was a poignant moment the other day. I was talking to a director of corporate communications for one of the sort of medium-sized US pharmaceutical companies, and he was saying, well, we really want people to think differently about us, but all the people we used to invite to lunch have been made redundant. So it must be possible, mustn't it, to find out who these new people are, The journalists we used to kind of have this relationship with, they're not there anymore, and maybe they're blogging or maybe they aren't, but who are these new people that have taken over? And so the question goes almost beyond the internet and social media as a phenomenon, that with the breakdown of these old media structures, nothing has yet totally solidified to replace them. So you have these people whose job it is essentially, if you work in corporate communications, your job is to get the message out there. Well, how do you do that? You used to do it by inviting people to junkets, take them off to Casablanca and show them your new car or whatever it was, buy them lunch. And of course you can do that, and some of our clients have done it. VW did something with us the other day where they just substituted bloggers for for journalists. So where they would have hitherto invited journalists along to a track day, they had a bunch of people who run message boards and blog and stuff like that. And that works reasonably well, but of course those people they're not journalists. They're sort of, they're people who are there for love, and they don't have the same relationship with a company that maybe a journalist has. They're not necessarily going to kind of function the same way. So if you're a company, the temptation is to dive in, to kind of set up a corporate blog. For example, there are a few of them that have worked famously, perhaps infamously, the GM blog a few years back. And we were talking perhaps unkindly about that last night before this talk. And we were going, well, GM blog, that did them a lot of good, right? Here they are kind of close to bankruptcy. It's not...
Well, that was because the cars sucked.
Well, that might have something to do with it,
Yeah.
Blogging and communications doesn't solve the problem, which is often around the product. So coming back to Hertz, we actually worked with Hertz's rivals for a while, and we're familiar with some of these customer service gripes that Kara was talking about. And frequently, what's interesting about social media is it's not about necessarily doing it. the pharma company, sorry, I should have finished that story. The pharma company decided they wanted to have a Twitter account. So they thought, well, we've got our annual results coming up. We'll tweet them. So they did 97 tweets about their annual results. They literally, line by line, went through. And even people who'd subscribed, who I assume were sort of journalists in the pharma sector, were going, no more tweets about the company results. You know, that's enough about the company results. And they were pretty sanguine about it. They said, well, you know, we're not going to do that again. But it's a serious issue for them. My hunch, and it is only a hunch, is that it sometimes works, but it often doesn't work. So, for example, one of our clients who will remain nameless, in response to something that we'd done with them, set up a corporate blog. And what was interesting about that was we did a benchmarking study showing, so we were benchmarking trustworthy and reliable companies in the sector of X, you know. So this is where they were, and they were doing okay, they weren't doing that well. And then they started blogging, and they got all this great PR, and lots of bloggers said, oh, God, this company's wonderful, they're so responsive, great people, wonderful stuff. And what was interesting was they moved up the chart in the post-benchmark, but not by as much as I was thinking they would have. But they'd done something rather interesting instead. They'd become a hub. They'd turned themselves into media. And that kind of cut both ways for them, because being media is not necessarily what their business was. Their business is their business. But they'd actually, weirdly, become a sort of competitor to all these people who were in the travel business. So they'd sort of become a competitor to TripAdvisor or whatever, you know, that they were kind of doling out news and views where previously they'd just been in the travel business. And I was sort of, you know, and I was puzzled and I have to say slightly shocked by that result, because I thought, so corporate blogging doesn't quite do what you thought it did. You thought it opened up this channel between the company and the consumer, and it enabled them to fix Kara's car or, you know, get her out of Seattle. But actually, it actually puts you into a different function. There are different expectations of you if you're media. So I think the fundamental issue, just to conclude, is that whatever you do to communicate, the main thing you should do with this stuff, if you're a business, is you should just use it carefully to understand what your business is and try and do a better job. And sometimes the best thing to do is not necessarily to talk. Apple famously is very, very tight-lipped, you know, talking about the tablet, lots of rumors. Apple's not saying anything. Occasionally they will have one of those great big press conferences, but they don't tweet, they don't blog about stuff like that. They just put the product out, and everybody else tweets and blogs about it.
And
so
where do you imagine people get all that secret information from?
Well, I couldn't speculate.
Guess.
But sometimes the product is the best thing. You know, sometimes the company's best contribution to the debate is just to do a fantastic job and be talked about. When I was at Amazon, we were just starting off in the UK. We did this thing where we would take orders, and we'd see they were coming from the big merchant banks in the city. You know, by let's say 11 o'clock, we'd have about, I don't know, 20 or 30 orders. We'd put them in the back of a black taxi, and we just send them to those banks. So they'd arrive at reception. So somebody said, "We got a package for you," and then people would go, and we wouldn't say anything about it. We never PR'd it, because we knew that the people who got those packages would just go crazy talking about how the most amazing thing had just happened to them. They just got something 3 hours later that they'd ordered that morning. And sometimes the best response to all of this social media stuff, when you're asked, how do I join the conversation? Join the conversation by really surprising your customers by how great a job you're doing. And that can do just as much good for you in social media as, you know, opening up that Twitter account.
Thank you. Okay. I think from the general to the specific, I work for Google, and we have 130 corporate blogs. Most of them have been developed by the teams, the engineering teams, and you can go and find them and read about them. Because they're developed by engineers, apparently 90% of them don't go through legal review, and 50% of them are not in English. The blog I work on and helped set up in Brussels was our Google Public Policy in Europe blog, and you can find it at googlepolicyeurope.blogspot.com. And it's kind of our lead blog in Europe that we work with on public policy, but also with our comms team as well. We set it up in March 2009, and it's what we've been blogging since then. And it's been a very interesting experience for me, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit, just to sort of provide some factual information. And actually, I'd be welcome the feedback and views on what we could do better, because as I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of improvements we've made, and as the previous speakers just said, I think we're not the only ones still working out how to do this really well. So the objectives of the blog, I think, were multifold. The first one was it felt like the right thing to do from a Google perspective. Say the rest of the company's been doing it, so why not us? Certainly in Brussels, as far as I know, we were the first company to start blogging on policy issues in Brussels. I'm not sure whether that's true for the whole of Europe, but certainly in Brussels it was. And I was very struck this morning by Richard Sambrook's remarks about the BBC and their need to be more transparent about, in their case, how they go about their editorial decisions for the news, because I think transparency is at the heart of the way that a lot of the Google blogging. And on the lobbying side, of course, lobbying itself is a sort of a word sometimes used pejoratively, and so I think one of the reasons for putting things up on our blog is to actually be a bit transparent about what we're doing there. The second thing is to be scalable. Scalable is a very commonly heard word in Google. We try to reach big audiences very quickly. And although there are 3 of us in Brussels, and we hope to be 5 soon, that's not a very large team to go and find all the different stakeholders that exist in Brussels. And more importantly, there are many, many more people walking around saying more or less the opposite to us. Brussels is a town full of vested interests. And we need to, well, it's a struggle to keep up with all the other people saying things against us, and you've read about some of those in the press, no doubt. One of the opportunities that we see is to try to strike up a dialogue with NGOs and citizens groups, people that are on the, it's citizens that are changing so much of the world that we live in, and that's been some of the themes of the early discussion. And if we're confident about our business, it's basically because we feel as though we can move and migrate to where the consumer is now and where the consumer will be tomorrow faster than other companies. And so we see the citizen, and also through them the sort of the NGO representatives, as being, if not allies to us, they're people saying the same kind of thing to us. And so we happily put out what we've got to say on a blog and hope that other people pick up on that. As I said earlier, we do this in conjunction with our comms team, and they use it as part of their kind of traditional PR outreach to journalists or those people that are kind of on the list of those that we communicate with. We have a few types of blogs. One of them I think would be consultation responses. Anybody that's in government affairs finds quite a lot of time answering consultations from governments. It's more or less a religion here in London. But the simple fact is that when you've done a consultation and you've produced the answers for some government questionnaire, you send it in, the government officials might read it, and sometime later it gets stuck up on a website along with 100 other responses. It seems to me that the quicker you get it up online, before other people have got theirs up online, then the more chance that anybody with a general interest in it will come and read your petition. So it doesn't do any harm to be the first one to put it up online. Another thing that we do is we have quite a few people come and visit us in Brussels, engineers, business people. They come, Googlers basically, who come to town, and we take them to go and meet commission officials or to make a speech in the European Parliament or whatever. Well, that's fine. We've met a few people, talked to a few people, got our message out there. But if we make a report of what's happened and put that out online, first of all, we've been more transparent about what lobbying is and what we've been up to. And secondly, we've amplified the message by making it available to everybody else. So it makes obvious sense if we've said it maybe in sort of semi-in public in a European Parliament hearing or a dinner or whatever, why not say it to everybody? So we put it out on that way. And then lastly, there is the, as I say, the PR side. We use the blogs as part of our kind of rapid rebuttal strategy. Twitter is also another feature of that. You'll see Twitter is particularly used by Google when we have the occasional outage on our service. We use it to defend our controversial decisions. You'll see if you go and look at the blog, there's rather a number of posts about books and rather a number about Street View. This is no coincidence, really. These are the issues that are currently happening at the moment.
And as I said before, it's fine. You know, a traditional PR team could pick up the phone and speak to a set number of journalists and maybe even some lead bloggers. But I mean, the blogosphere is sort of, well, it's not infinite, not literally speaking, but it is indeterminate. So the easiest way to reach everybody that might want to express a view on something that you're doing is to make information publicly available. And so what about the metrics for success? Basically, I think there are a few. Certainly, unique visitors to the site is one, and we can measure that using Google Analytics. You'll see on there, there's also, we have a feed burner feed, and that's actually been, it's been quite, well, from my perspective, quite encouraging to watch it kind of slowly increasing. A couple of months ago, we went through 500 followers. Now we're at 800. It feels sort of a bit trivial, probably, compared to all things D, but it's a source of pride from my perspective, and it's growing on a sort of a fairly steady basis. If you look at the readership, basically, I have a chart, but I didn't need to show it. It's very simple. Sort of the visits to our site since it started in March, and it basically does this, and then it goes along. And this bit over here is in theory higher than over here, but the peak was so high that you can't see any of this on the scale. And that peak was one post, and that post was the one where we said, actually, very topical. We said how news publishers could avoid being crawled by Google. We had a post about ACAP and a post about the general way in which newspapers could avoid being part of Google search if that's what they wanted to do. This was the one that really took off. It got twittered about, and it got put on other websites, on a Russian website as well, which unfortunately I could never read, but that seemed to lead to a huge amount of traffic. So we have one that led to a lot of readership, and it was also the one that got most of the comments as well. And for the rest, I guess we're still working on that. We've only had one sort of big hit, and I'm wondering where the next one will come from. But it's that comes, I think, to one of the stories that, well, one of the issues that was made in the initial blurb about this this part of the day, about how bold you can be as a company. Press statements and public statements are, by definition, you have to be a little bit more careful than the kind of private meetings, which is what I generally do as a lobbyist. On the other hand, we've learned that an interesting article, and certainly a provocative one, it's far more fun to have a lot of readers and lots of comments. What we haven't learned to do yet is to work out how to interact with those comments. I guess we should probably have provided some answers to the people that commented. We didn't do that. That's something that we've got to work on for the future, I guess. And I think that's probably all that I should say about it for the moment.
Good. Thank you.